Hello, I'm FCall, and I'm an aspiring game developer. It's been a hot minute, around 300,000 of them, if we're counting all the ones since I last put out a proper devlog. Time Another Fiddly Concepts is finished. It's not everything I hoped it would be, but at the very least it captures some of what I was hoping to achieve. I've learned a lot along the way, so I thought for my second and final devlog on the game, I'd talk about some of that, because at times it has not been particularly fun. First of all, I haven't made any videos. While I've been streaming on Twitch, I've put no proper videos up since the first one back in April. I think I've uncharitably viewed devlogs as developers trying to drum up a little bit of interest in playing their game. And while in part that might be accurate, there's some rubber duck developer magic going on there too. They force you to reflect, to organise your thoughts and really take stock of whether or not you're actually getting anywhere. So, in no particular order, these are some of the thoughts I've had while developing my silly little marble game. Since we're talking about videos, in my original devlog, I realised I said Time Another Fiddly Concepts. So even then, I hadn't even really left room for it just being a maze game. In my head, I knew it was going to be the conceptually difficult game before I even opened Unity. Starting with concepts I wanted to try and explain through gameplay was a very silly thing to do as a first-time game developer. Maybe even as any developer. It's hard enough to try and find the fun in gameplay without also holding yourself hostage to a particular conceptual driver. It seems like it's better to start with gameplay and then attach concepts after the fact, come up with a theme, find the gameplay, and then make the gameplay fit the theme. Player experience comes first and foremost, surely, rather than what fiddly message the developer wants to get across. There are a lot of facets to game development, and you can't code your way out of all of them. When I started, I thought that designing a simple maze game with infinitely tiling levels would be straightforward. And now, at the end, I can almost certainly say that it would have been. But as much as I could have written an algorithm to make mazes and spend my whole time doing that instead, it still wouldn't have been as powerful as handcrafting unique and interesting levels. And crafting unique, interesting levels, as I have found out to my cost, is not the trivial undertaking that I might have imagined it to be. As a software developer, I sometimes come across roles in my day job whose existence I question, and I brought that mentality to game development. I couldn't have been more wrong. Psychology of the player is perhaps the foundation of all game development. We're not telling them a story, we're carving out a space for them to tell a story to themselves. As developers, we're hoping they'll feel a certain way about our project, and all of the fluffy stuff is what elevates a game from a glorified showcase to an actual piece of art. However small in scope you think your project is, it's almost certainly still too big. When I suddenly realised how intimidating designing interesting levels with no experience was, I had two choices. Knuckle down and start learning a few things about level design, or find a cheap trick to avoid it. And I plumbed for the latter, by adding more complexity and artifice and quadrupled the amount of work I had to do. Rather than focusing on a couple of mechanics and polishing them until they were interesting, I made 6 mechanics, none of which really meaningfully interact with each other. Partway through development, I saw a great video about orthogonal design and the power of overlapping mechanics rather than, well, what I did. The closest I got was Self-Perception 4, which is just its internal name. Coincidentally, it's probably the best level in the game, and hopefully you'll notice it when you play it. Had I listened to my instincts and gone more in that direction, I might have ended up with something a little better, but I was too focused on making sure the gameplay fit the concept rather than the gameplay being fun. In the same vein, however complicated you think your game is going to be, it's almost certainly going to be more complicated. In the early days, my code was in a few places and relatively tidy. I don't think I could confidently say that anymore, even though I should have had that instinct from my day job. By not really having the first idea of what I was going to implement, let alone how, a lot of ideas ended up being managed in multiple places rather than one. There's a programming concept called DRY, which is don't repeat yourself. The opposite, WET, stands for write everything twice. Normally that's used as a backronym to make fun of code which is duplicated everywhere, but perhaps it's also a good rule of thumb. Write things twice. The first version is your janky implementation to get it working, and then the second version is you refactoring, tidying up your code so that it plays nicely with your other systems. I thought I was nearly done a month or two ago, and I've added a fair amount of code since then. So going forward, I'm going to try and be more intentional about taking regular opportunities to tidy things up. Now that I'm looking at things through the lens of game development, most games I play, I write a few little lines down about what I liked about how they implemented something, or something I thought I should try and avoid. And one of my biggest bugbears is that games shouldn't outstay their welcome. Not to name names, but by the end of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, I was in hell. There are over 200 hours of fairly samey content, and I had the compulsion to finish the whole damn thing. If that game had been 100 hours or 50, it could have been one of my favourite entries in the series. Slightly forgettable story aside. With my game, I almost feel like I have the opposite problem. There are mechanics that I introduce, like the invisible mazes with the plotting mechanic, where I could have done some more levels, but again, I felt intimidated by the idea of knuckling down and doing some half-decent level design, so somehow it's simultaneously too long and too short. Graphically, I was aiming for that indie, low-poly block colour aesthetic, and instead it feels like a placeholder prototype. I think I went perhaps too lo-fi, while simultaneously having round edges in places where they didn't belong. Would you believe that almost every single asset in that game is me sweating away in Blender for hours? Because I was sort of figuring it out as I went, I didn't get a vertical slice until very late in the game, which meant if there had been changes to make, I probably wouldn't have cared to make them. I need to make sure that I shorten the time between me making part of my game and other people playing it. This was very much waterfall rather than agile. When I do have people play it, I need to avoid taking it personally when someone gives me negative feedback. Just because I know about the issue and I have a way to fix it, or a reason not to fix it, or a plan to implement a feature which somebody has mentioned isn't in there already, that doesn't mean their feedback is invalid. If anything, it's good that it's on my radar. And when these things do go wrong, I need to be okay with failure. If something doesn't work, I need to be comfortable throwing it away or making big changes, especially if I want to make something good. But it's not all bad. Honestly, I'm quite happy with how the music and voiceover turned out. There's definitely a lot of room to improve, but I think that the music could pass for background music in a random sci-fi game. I think it's doing alright for this video. And I feel like I broadly captured the vibe from the Sensorium from Psychonauts 2 that I was going for with the voiceover post-processing. I'm really pleased that I managed to stay disciplined enough to finish the thing too. The trap that I see a lot of developers fall into is constantly starting new side projects. And apart from a brief spell making a janky little Tetris clone, I've stuck with this thing since April. And as much as I have a lot to learn, one of the things I think it's important to train is my finishing power. There were points where I nearly gave up, either because Twitch can be quite lonely, or I just didn't see my ideas making it from my brain onto the page. But here I find myself, in possession of a short, flawed, but ultimately finished video game. So in summary, what have I learned? Leave yourself wiggle room. don't box yourself in from day one. Fun comes first, concept comes second. Code is just the implementation of a design. If the design is half-baked, great code won't fix it. Speaking of code, tidy up before it's too late. Do 1 or 2 interesting things well rather than lots of boring things badly. If you don't like your aesthetic, chances are your players won't either. Test early, test often, and avoid rationalizing away valid criticism. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Don't kid yourself. But done is done. Done is done. Scars are better reminders than scrapes. So with that, I don't really have anything else to say, but maybe go try it, I guess. It's on itch.io. You might enjoy it. And I guess until next time, thanks for watching.